What does it mean for us to be called by God? From our second reading today from the Epistle to the Hebrews, and from our Gospel today from Mark, it really focuses around the idea of being called. Bartimaeus was called by Jesus by name and said, "Here, come to me." And he asked for him for what? "I want to see." Now we can look a little deeper than our external idea of what it means to see. When we think of a blind man, we think of someone that can't see, right? You can't physically see. And that could be what Bartimaeus' issue was. But if we go deeper and look really at a parable as Christ would normally try and speak through, this man was not understanding the will of God. He was not understanding where God was calling him in his life. And what do we hear of in our second reading from Hebrews? We heard that a man doesn't choose to go and preach. If he does, he's doing it for himself. But that it's truly a calling from God. As Aaron, Moses' brother, as Aaron was called by God, so too are the priestly order in the line of Melchizedek. We still today, as priests, say that we are ordained into the priesthood of Jesus Christ in the line of Melchizedek. We go back to that priest. And in our calling, it's interesting, when a guy goes to seminary, you never really know what you're going to get. Because for me, when I went to seminary, I had already failed out of college once. Went to OU, got a 1.3 GPA after 3 semesters. For those of you that don't know, that's like a D- average, not good. Dropped out of college, worked full-time for a year, hated it. Went back to college, worked full-time while I was there, and was studying philosophy. And during that year that I was off from college, I got this first inkling in my mind of maybe God's calling me to be a priest. And so I went once a month and I met with one of my priest friends, Father Phil Seaton. Didn't realize I was going a spiritual direction, but that's what it ended up being. For me, it was, I'm a poor dropout from college that doesn't have any money, and he's taking me to Charleston's to eat. Let's do it. So that's what I thought this was about. But the Lord used that as an opportunity. And in fact, it was hilarious. The last time that I went to see him during that year off of college, I drove from Duncan, where I was living at that time, working at an oil refinery. I drove from Duncan to Lawton, where he was at Holy Family. I get there, and wouldn't you know it, they had just finished their confirmation mass. And Archbishop Beltran was there. And he looked at me and said, "Danny, what are you waiting for?" I was like, "What?" "I told you your freshman year in high school, when I did the 50th anniversary for Bishop McGinnis, that you were called to be a priest. Where you at?" And I thought, me? No, that's not possible. So I put that in the back of my mind, went back to college, went to Oklahoma City Community College for 3 semesters, and my major at that time was philosophy and sociology. There's not much you can do with a philosophy degree, except ask, "Would you like fries with that?" Or at least that's kind of what they say. Because you can talk about all of these heady things, but you really don't get much done. So unless I want to be a theorist that just kind of talks about a lot of things and tries to understand the world, or I wanted to be a counselor like my dad was, there really wasn't much in there. But I found in those classes something very fascinating. I was interested in learning. For the first time that I could remember, I couldn't stop asking questions. And while I was there, one of my professors, Professor Mike Punches, who was the head of the philosophy department, I had 3 classes with him, and at the end of every class, I'd follow him to his office and talk to him for about another 45 minutes, just asking questions, seeking to understand how we think, why these philosophers thought this, where the idea of God came from, and where the mystery of life, and why do we know what we do, and why do we do what we should do? Well, backtrack a little bit. During that year off, I realize I'm kind of bouncing back and forth. It's like a preview, foreshadowing, go back and forth. But in that year, I started the process to apply for seminary. I had submitted an application, put my name in there, and then something happened. I talked to my pastor. And so me and my pastor growing up, we didn't really get along because he did things his way, and that's all there was to it. And if you've met me, we're kind of the same. I like to do things my way, but I don't always get them, and I've learned that as a priest that I can't always get my way, and that's okay. But I didn't understand this as a 19, 20-year-old individual. So at one point, I was telling him that I was going through and reading the scriptures for the first time for myself, starting from the book of Genesis and going through. By the way, if you're going to read scriptures, it's really, 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 really hard outside of the Father Mike podcast to start at the beginning and go chronologically through, because you get stuck in Leviticus really quick. And if you make it to Leviticus, good luck with Numbers, because you just get stuck in there, and then you don't get the other 68 books of scripture. You get stuck. And so I was telling my pastor at that time that I started the application process for seminary and told him about this amazing thing that I understood for the first time in the book of Genesis. And you guys have probably learned the short time I've been here, I don't think linearly. I'm kind of all over the place sometimes in my homilies. And so I was trying to explain to him the story of Joseph, the youngest brother of the 12 before Benjamin was born. And I said, give me a second, let me take that back, let me think about this for a second. And it was one phrase that he said that put me on a different path for the next 2 years. That's why as a priest, I always try and think before I speak, because even though I am not an important person, sometimes because of the office of the priesthood, what I say, people take more seriously sometimes, or more to heart. What he said was, as I paused, Danny, you're not known for thinking. At that moment, I was shattered. I had just failed out of college. I was trying to do something on my own, looking for some affirmation, and he just pulled the rug out from under me. That's what I saw in the moment. When I look back, it was just his sarcasm. It was just a joke from him. But how many times do we take that sarcasm and jokes from each other as something that's more than that, you know? That we hold on to, we hold that grudge. Well, from that moment until I ended up applying to seminary, what I said was, if this is what a priest is, I want nothing to do with it. I will never be a priest because of this man and that one phrase that he said. So fast forward to when I was at the community college again and studying philosophy and just engaged, and I was so excited, and I started writing my own autobiography because I thought, man, I'm the most interesting person in the world. We all have that moment in our lives, don't we? Where the world evolves around us. Well, I felt like Forrest Gump, like I was at this event and this event and this event. In human history, these are big events, right? And so we talk about the call. That's what kind of rounds this out. When we are called by God. Well, when I was called by God, I actually picked up the phone and made a phone call. It was the most self-serving, selfish phone call I've ever made. I called the vocations office and I said, hi, this is Danny Grover. I started the application process a few years ago, but I kind of stopped it. How long is the autobiography for the application supposed to be? Notice I didn't ask, what do I need to pray about? Who do I need to talk to? I said, how much do you want to know about me? Because I'm so special. They said 1 to 2 pages. I said, I've already got 23. That's just the last year and a half. You need to cut that down. And so in that moment, I thought, that was weird. I can remember exactly where I was when I made that phone call, and that was the Lord using that phone call to call me to being open to discerning the priesthood. When we are called, we must discern before we can accept. The problem is, how many people know what the word discern means? Very few. To discern, when we're talking about a vocation, is living so as to be. So, if you are discerning a vocation to married life, and you are not seeking to date, you are not actually discerning the vocation to married life. If you are discerning a vocation to the priesthood or the religious life, and you are dating someone, you are not actually discerning a vocation to the religious life. I didn't learn that until my 8th year in seminary. I always thought that to discern is to prayerfully consider. And yes, that's in there as well. But when someone is called to the priesthood, when someone is called to the vocation of marriage, called to the vocation of being a religious brother or sister, called to being a consecrated virgin, they are called by God. Now, in seminary, it's not just the guy that goes through seminary making the decisions. It's the man that enters seminary, the vocation staff of the diocese, the bishop of the diocese, the vocation staff of the seminary, and ultimately God speaking through all of those that say, yes, this is a man that I am calling in the order of Melchizedek to be ordained as a priest. But many times when we go into seminary, we think that if we leave seminary, we'll be seen as a failure. Has anybody ever thought that before? Oh, why'd so-and-so leave seminary? What did they do wrong? But then we don't ask, well, why'd so-and-so get divorced? Why'd so-and-so not go through with their engagement and get married? We rarely ask those questions because we forget that each and every one of those vocations have a call from God. That ultimately we have a vocation as sons and daughters of God, ultimately to love. But beyond loving, how are we called to live that out? Husbands, you're called to live that out by loving your wives. Wives, you're called to live that out by loving your husbands. And mother and father, you're called to live that out by loving each other, loving God, and loving your children. I'm called to live that out by loving you guys. Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's not. As it said in that second reading, did you catch that in there from the book of Hebrews? He said, sometimes people are hard to deal with. Suck it up, it'll work. And at the heart of all of that is the Lord calling us to be prayerful. How do we engage with God? Do we just spend this hour every week coming to Mass or live streaming Mass? And then we go the rest of the week not even thinking about the Lord? And then we wonder, why doesn't God tell me what to do? Well, He's trying to. But we are so distracted by the world out there that we can't really understand the voice of God in our hearts. We're so distracted by society, so distracted by college football, professional football. Before Mass, OSU was down 17-14. I was watching it, but I know that sometimes we get distracted. But in that distraction, where can we find God? How do we lift each other up? That's something I've learned the last few years. Being a sports fan, to be a good sport is to love even if you lose. Growing up, if OU lost a game and we were having a good season, you couldn't talk to me until Wednesday. If the 49ers back in the 90s, my team, had a playoff loss to those darn Dallas Cowboys again, you couldn't talk to me for 2 weeks. I was so wrapped up with things that ultimately don't really matter that I wasn't working on my relationship with God. When I look back and ask God, why won't you show me what to do? He's saying, because you're not paying attention. Focus, listen. And in my head I'm hearing, boomer sooner, boomer sooner. That's all I'm hearing. Because that's what I'm focusing on. And where we put our focus is how and where we put our love. If our focus is on God, the love will come in everything else. That's why the Lord tells us, love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. That all of the commandments subsist in these two. If we put God first, we will know what He's calling us to do. If we put God first, we will know why tragedies befall humanity. If we put God first, we will learn to love even when it hurts. When we're at the bedside of our loved one who is dying, or at the bedside of our loved one who is being born into the world. The happiest and saddest moments of our lives, we will see where God is present. But not just in those large moments. We'll see when a certain song comes on the radio that we just needed to hear at that moment. Or a certain verse comes on the radio when we're flipping through channels and Catholic radio, what's this? 100.7? Never heard this before. That's our Catholic radio station, by the way, 100.7. And I'll hear these stories of people struggling with their relationship with God, or hearing these amazing things, and God gives us exactly what we need when we need it. My first year as a priest, my spiritual director died of a heart attack. 3 days after I saw him. It was actually like a week ago was the anniversary. And I was so just grief-stricken. I kid you not, on the way from the rectory to the cathedral for his funeral, I turned on Catholic radio, and God was there. They were giving a talk on grief, on how we grieve the loss of a loved one. It's like, dude, stop showing off. But it's exactly what I needed when I needed it, because I looked where he showed me to look. If we don't hear the voice of God, it's because we aren't paying attention. If you are lost in the trajectory of your life, take a step back and ask yourself the question, when was the last time I actually asked God what I was supposed to do? And not just asked him what I was supposed to do, but listened and tried to pay attention for his answer. Because we are all called. We are all chosen as the beloved sons and daughters of God, created in his image and likeness. God wants you to hear his message. What is he saying to you today?